I never imagined this.
Thea Sinclair was 28 years old and had 2 secrets she guarded like treasure. 1, she had never slept with anyone. 2, she wasn't ashamed of it, even when friends laughed or men gave up on her. She was waiting for a real connection, not convenience or social pressure. But that Friday night, running from a persistent coworker, she bumped, literally, into the most dangerous man in the city and ended up confessing secret number 1. And Roman Volkov looked at her with cold predator eyes and said one word that changed everything. Perfect. First of all, hello, I'm Lena, the mind behind every story on this channel. And now on screen, you're seeing comments from Stella Crawford and Rose. Thank you so much to all of you who comment. And tell me something, if you found out you're dating a mafia boss, what would you do? Answer down below and maybe your comment will appear in the next video. Chapter 1, The Encounter and the Confession.
You're safe now.
The library was silent that late afternoon, only the sound of pages turning breaking the sacred quiet of the place. I was organizing the historical fiction section when I felt his presence approaching from behind. Derek Morrison, my coworker who for the past 2 weeks had decided my polite refusal was just a misinterpreted game. Thea, let's grab a drink after work. His voice came too close, invading my personal space in a way that made my skin crawl for all the wrong reasons. I took a deep breath before turning around, keeping my expression polite but firm. No, Derek, thanks for the offer. But no, come on, just one drink. I promise it'll be fun. He took a step forward, and I had to fight the urge to step back. I think I already said no. Several times, actually. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but my patience was starting to run thin. Why? Do you have a boyfriend? Derek crossed his arms. Because I've never seen anyone picking you up here. Heat rose up my neck. That doesn't matter, Derek. I don't want to go out with you. End of story. You're such a goody two-shoes, you know that? You need to loosen up a little. Let go. The condescending tone made my anger spike. And you need to learn to take no for an answer. I walked past him with the books in my hands. Excuse me, I need to finish my work. When I finally managed to leave the library 20 minutes later, the sky was already painted with orange tones of twilight. I hugged the 3 books I'd decided to take home, breathing in the fresh night air. Thea, wait. Derek's voice cut through the silence of the street, and my heart sank when I realized he'd followed me. I automatically quickened my pace, turning the corner without looking where I was going, just wanting distance from him. That's when it happened. My body collided with something solid, strong, and unmovable. The books flew from my hands in chaotic ballet, and I felt my balance slip completely, but I didn't fall. Large, firm hands caught me by the arms before gravity could finish its work, fingers pressing into my skin through the thin fabric of my blouse with a controlled strength that was both gentle and absolutely commanding. Careful. The voice was deep, gravelly, laced with an accent that made each syllable sound like a dangerous promise. I slowly looked up, following the line of the impeccable black suit, until I finally found the face of the man who had kept me from falling, and the air simply disappeared from my lungs. Roman Volkov wasn't just handsome. He was devastating in a way that made my brain short-circuit. His eyes were an icy gray that seemed capable of seeing through all my defenses, and there was a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow that only added an extra layer of danger to the equation. His presence was so intense, I felt the air around us grow heavier, as if the atmosphere itself recognized it was in the presence of someone powerful. Sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going. The words tumbled out while he continued holding me, his fingers still firm on my arms. Are you running from someone? The question came accompanied by a penetrating look that seemed to read every secret in my expression. Before I could answer, Derek's voice cut through the moment. Thea, I just wanted to talk. You don't need to. He stopped dead when his eyes met Roman's, and I watched the color drain from his face in real time. Roman turned his head slowly, with a feline grace that was terrifying in its smoothness, and the icy look he directed at Derek could have frozen hell itself. She said no, several times, from what I understood. I just wanted to talk. Derek's voice came out shaky. And she doesn't want to. Roman took a few slow steps toward Derek. So you're going to leave. Now, before I lose my patience. Who are you? Derek tried to sound defiant, but his voice betrayed his fear. Roman tilted his head slightly, and the smile that curved his lips had nothing friendly about it. Someone you definitely don't want as an enemy. Get out of here before I change my mind about letting you leave in one piece. Derek literally ran, and I heard the sound of his footsteps fading down the sidewalk. The silence that followed was charged with an electric tension that made my skin tingle. Roman walked back to where I stood, crouching down to pick up the books scattered across the ground. Does he bother you like this all the time? Lately, yeah. I crouched beside him to help, our fingers almost touching, but I can handle it. You didn't have to. Didn't seem like it. He handed me the books, and when our eyes met again, I felt something tighten deep in my chest. Something warm and scary and completely new. You work at the library? Yes. What's your name? Roman Volkov. He studied my face. Need a ride home? I don't usually accept rides from strangers. The answer came automatically. Something that almost looked like a smile touched his lips. Smart. But I just saved you from your stalker. That should count for something. I laughed nervously. I guess so. But my apartment is close. Just a few blocks. Then I'll walk with you, to make sure he doesn't come back. It wasn't a question. I sighed, but couldn't avoid the small smile. Okay, thank you. The walk took only 10 minutes, but Roman had a presence that filled the space in a strange but comforting way. Do you like working with books? He broke the silence. I love it. It's like peace, you know? Quiet. Stories. Do you read? Occasionally. Mostly history, philosophy, military strategy. Makes sense, I murmured. You seem strategic. He turned his head to look at me. And you seem kind. Heat rose to my cheeks. Thank you. I think it was a compliment, Thea. We reached my building too quickly. I stopped in front of the door, not knowing what to say. This is it. Thanks for everything. For getting rid of Derek. For walking with me. For not being a serial killer. I wanted to die of embarrassment. Ignore that last part. He didn't laugh, but his eyes gleamed with amusement. I'll consider it ignored. He pulled a card from his jacket's inner pocket. If Derek bothers you again, call me. I took the card. It only had a phone number. This just has a number, no company name. It's all you need to know for now. Suspicion finally caught up with my brain. What exactly do you do, Roman? Various businesses. Nothing you need to worry about. That was one of the vaguest answers I've ever gotten in my life. It was a safe answer. He studied my face. Good night, Thea Sinclair. Good night, Roman Volkov. And thank you. Really. He stayed silent for a long second, just looking at me. You're welcome. 3 days passed without incident, until Derek simply didn't show up for work. Thea, do you know where Derek is? A colleague asked. No, why? He requested a transfer to another branch. In another city, completely out of the blue. She seemed shocked. Very strange, don't you think? My stomach tightened with a feeling. As soon as I could, I ran to the bathroom and dialed the number on the card. He answered on the second ring. Thea, how did you know it was me? Unknown number. Few people have this contact. Derek requested a transfer to another city. I took a deep breath. Roman, did you do something? I offered him some alternatives. He chose the smartest one. What does that mean? It means he won't bother you anymore. Ever again. The promise in his voice was solid. Are you mad at me? I don't know. Part of me is relieved, but you scared him. He was stalking you, Thea. He deserved to be scared. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Okay, valid point. But you can't do this every time someone's inconvenient. Why not? Because you barely know me. What if I want to know you better? His voice dropped lower, more intense. My heart skipped a beat. What? Dinner. With me. Tomorrow night. Are you asking me out on a date? Yes. Why? Because you're interesting, Thea. Different from everything in my world. I should have said no, but the part of me that had spent 3 days thinking about those ice-gray eyes whispered something different. Okay, dinner tomorrow. He arrived punctually at 7, devastating in a charcoal suit that highlighted every line of his body. You look beautiful. His gaze traveled over my body with obvious appreciation. I had chosen a simple navy blue dress. Thank you. You look very handsome, too. The restaurant was elegant, quiet, and private. We talked about favorite books, my childhood, how I'd lost my parents 5 years ago. Roman listened with total attention, as if every word mattered. Roman, you still haven't told me what you really do. I finally gathered the courage to ask. He fell silent, swirling his wine glass. Do you really want to know? Yes. I control an organization. Import, export, protection, among other things. The pieces fell into place. You're in the Mafia. Bratva, Russian Mafia, specifically. He didn't deny it, and that shocked me. I should have gotten up. But I stayed seated, surprisingly calm. And you're telling me this why? Because if we keep seeing each other, you'll find out eventually. I prefer to be honest now. What if I get up and leave? Something that looked like pain passed through his eyes. I respect your decision, but I'd be disappointed. Why me, Roman? He leaned in, and suddenly he was too close. Because you're pure, Thea. You're real, genuine, different from everything that's part of my world. When I look at you, I see something I thought didn't exist anymore. I'm nothing special. You are, and the fact that you don't realize it only makes you even more special. He took my hand. You make me want to be better. My heart was beating so hard, I was sure he could hear it. In the car on the way to my apartment, the proximity made the air seem too thin. Are you afraid of me? The question came softly. A little, but not of you, of your world. I wouldn't let anything from that world touch you, ever. The promise was absolute. How can you guarantee that? Because I'm the man who controls that world, and what's mine, I protect with everything I have. We reached my building, and he came to my side of the car, opening the door with old-fashioned courtesy. When I got out, he stood there, so close I had to tilt my head back. His hand slowly rose to touch my face with a gentleness that contradicted the power I knew existed in that body. Can I kiss you, Thea? And that's when the panic hit. because I had never really done this, not like this. All my insecurities surfaced at once. I need to tell you something first. The words came out shaky, and I felt tears starting to burn my eyes. What? You can tell me anything. The tears started to fall. I'm 28 years old and I've never been with anyone for real. I've never let myself. I couldn't say the word, but he understood. I waited for rejection. I waited for laughter. I waited for him to pull away, but Roman simply stopped, his eyes fixed on my face as if he were seeing something precious. And when he spoke, his voice was so low and intense that I felt each word reverberate through my bones. Perfect. My brain froze. What? He used his thumb to wipe away the tears. You, Thea, you're perfect. Exactly like this. Exactly as you are. You don't think it's weird? Pathetic? His expression shifted to cold fury. Who made you think there's something wrong with you? Friends? Ex-dates? Everyone always thought there was something wrong with me. The words came out in sobs. Both his hands rose to hold my face. There's nothing, absolutely nothing, wrong with you. You waited for a real connection, for something that mattered. That's not pathetic. That's rare. Precious. It shows strength and conviction. I thought you'd leave. I'm not going anywhere, but now I know I need to be even more careful with you. He wiped away more tears. I won't pressure you. I won't rush you. When it happens, if it happens, it'll be because you chose it, because you trust, and it'll be completely your decision. You're so different from what I expected. A small smile touched his lips. And you're exactly what I didn't know I needed. He leaned in slowly, and when his lips touched mine, it was gentle, respectful, loaded with promise, but without pressure. It was perfect in a way that made more tears fall, but these were from relief, from gratitude. When we pulled apart, I was breathless and trembling. Wow, it was all I could say. His expression softened. Wow, that was my first real kiss, and it was, wow. Something shifted in his eyes, something deep and intense and almost possessive. The first of many, if you'll let me. I will. He kissed my forehead with reverence. Good night, Thea. Sleep well. Good night, Roman. I went up to my apartment with shaking legs and my heart beating a chaotic rhythm. When I closed the door, I let my body slide to the floor. I touched my lips with trembling fingers, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Roman Volkov, head of the Bratva, had kissed me. And when I confessed, crying, my most vulnerable secret, he had said I was perfect. And somehow crazy and scary and completely irrational, I believed him. I believed every word. Thea herself admitted she was being irrational, but was trusting Roman really the right choice? Chapter 2. Obsession and Dating.
I thought of you.
2 weeks had passed since that first kiss, and my life had transformed into something completely unrecognizable in a way that was both terrifying and absolutely magical. Roman Volkov had entered my quiet librarian existence like an elegant hurricane wearing a tailored suit, and now I couldn't imagine what it had been like to live without his constant presence orbiting around my days. We were officially together, though I still wasn't sure when exactly that had become official. Maybe it was on the second date, when he held my hand across the restaurant table and said in that deep voice that made my skin tingle that he didn't want me going out with anyone else. Maybe it was on the third, when he introduced me to Victor as my girlfriend, with a tone that left no room for questions. Or maybe it was in that first kiss, when he said perfect, and something inside my chest permanently rearranged itself. Regardless of the exact moment, the truth was that Roman had become a constant presence in my life in a way that should have been suffocating, but that, strangely, felt natural. He sent me good morning texts before my alarm even went off, showed up at the library during my lunch break with food from expensive restaurants I would never have the courage to enter alone, and called me every night before bed just to hear my voice. And the flowers. My God, the flowers. Every single day, without exception, a different bouquet arrived at the library with a small card that said only R in elegant, angular handwriting. Red roses on Monday, white lilies on Tuesday, pink tulips on Wednesday, and so on in an endless rotation of colors and scents that transformed my work desk into an improvised garden. My colleagues were shocked the first few times, surrounding my station with wide eyes and curious whispers about who the mysterious man was who was clearly obsessed with me. Now, 2 weeks later, they just smiled when the delivery arrived, some with barely disguised envy in their eyes, others with that kind of genuine joy that comes from seeing someone being treated like something precious. And that was exactly how Roman treated me, like a rare treasure he'd found by accident, and now guarded with a kind of possessive reverence that should have scared me, but instead made something warm and safe spread through my chest every time he looked at me. What surprised me most was his patience. We kissed, of course, long kisses that made my head spin, and my heart beat so hard I was sure he could feel it through the layers of clothing that always remained firmly in place. But Roman never pushed for more. His hands stayed respectfully on my waist or my face, never wandering into territories that might make me feel uncomfortable or rushed. It was as if he'd made a silent promise to himself that he would court me the old-fashioned way, with patience and care, and was determined to keep that promise no matter what it cost. Victor was Roman's right-hand man, and I officially met him at the end of the first week of dating during dinner at an Italian restaurant that Roman said was owned by an associate. Victor was a few years younger than Roman, with short-cut blonde hair and blue eyes that didn't miss any detail. The kind of man you instinctively knew was dangerous, even when he was smiling politely. "So you're the girl who tamed the boss," Victor said as soon as we sat down, and there was genuine humor in his voice, even though the words were provocative. I laughed, feeling heat rise to my cheeks like it always did when someone made comments about my relationship with Roman. Tamed is a very strong word for what's happening here. No, it's the perfect word. Victor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with barely contained amusement. He smiles now. "Do you understand how significant that is? Roman never smiled before you showed up. Never." I turned my head to look at Roman, who was visibly irritated with the direction the conversation had taken, an almost imperceptible tension in his jawline. "Victor, are you sure you want to keep talking?" "Completely sure." Victor ignored the veiled threat, with the ease of someone who knew Roman well enough to know exactly how far he could push. "And he's patient now, too. Boss was never patient with anything in his life. But with you, it's like watching a man reborn. Maybe because she deserves patience," Roman said, and the way he spoke, with that intensity burning beneath the calm words, made something inside me melt completely. "Because she's important." Victor fell silent for a moment, studying me with an expression that seemed to be reassessing who I was and what I represented in Roman's life. "You must be really special. I've known this man for 15 years, since he took over the Bratva after his father died. I've never seen him like this with anyone." The mention of Roman's father made something shift in the atmosphere around us, a sudden tension that spread across the table like creeping ice. I felt Roman go completely still beside me, his muscles stiffening in a way that indicated this was a painful topic that shouldn't be touched. I took his hand under the table, intertwining our fingers in a gesture of silent comfort, and felt when he squeezed back with a force that bordered on painful, but that I knew he needed. "Were you close? You and your father?" The question came out soft, careful, giving him the option to answer or change the subject as he wanted. "No." The answer came so cold and final that it effectively ended any further exploration of that territory, and I simply nodded, squeezing his hand once more to show I understood, that I wouldn't push, that I respected the boundaries he clearly had regarding the past. The rest of the dinner flowed more smoothly, with Victor telling carefully edited stories about him and Roman over the years, always stopping before the details became too specific or violent. It was obvious he was trying to give me a glimpse of the man Roman was, without completely scaring me, and I appreciated the effort even knowing there was probably much more hidden between the lines than he was willing to reveal. Iris, on the other hand, had no filter when I finally told her about Roman 3 days after our first date. We were at my apartment on a Friday night, she with a glass of wine in hand, and me with tea, because I'd never developed a taste for alcohol, when I casually let slip that I was dating someone. "You're dating?" Her eyes widened almost comically. "Since when? Who is it? Why didn't you tell me before?" "It's recent. Very recent, actually." I tried to downplay it, but Iris knew me too well to let it slide. "Thea Sinclair, you're going to tell me everything right now, or I swear I'll start asking increasingly embarrassing questions until you beg to be allowed to talk." The threat came with a smile that showed she was absolutely serious. I sighed, knowing there was no escape. "Okay, his name is Roman Volkov. He's 36. He's successful in his business, and we met 2 weeks ago when he helped me with a problem at work." Roman Volkov. Iris repeated the name slowly, as if testing its weight on her tongue, and then something clicked in her head, and her expression changed from curiosity to absolute shock. "Wait, Roman Volkov? The Roman Volkov? The head of the Russian Bratva who controls half the illegal business in the city?" My stomach sank. "You know him? Everyone who works in hospital emergency knows his reputation." Iris put the wineglass on the coffee table so hard I feared the glass would break. "Thea, this is dangerous. Extremely dangerous. You can't date a Mafia boss, especially from the Bratva. He would never hurt me." The defense came automatically, instinctive, loaded with a certainty that came from somewhere deep inside me. Not him. His world. Iris stood up, starting to pace back and forth across the room with nervous agitation. People who live that kind of life have enemies, Thea. Violent and dangerous people who won't hesitate to use you against him if they find out you matter. He protects me, I said softly, thinking of all the times in the past 2 weeks I'd noticed discreet men following me at a distance. Bodyguards that Roman had placed in my routine without even asking if I wanted them. He would never let anything from that world touch me. Iris stopped pacing and looked at me with a mixture of frustration and genuine concern. And your situation? Does he know about you being? Heat instantly rose to my cheeks. I told him on the first date, even before we officially started dating. And the question came loaded with tension, as if Iris was preparing to need to defend my honor against someone who had reacted badly. And he said I was perfect. The words came out in a whisper, still loaded with the emotion I'd felt in that moment. Said there was nothing wrong with me, that waiting for a real connection showed strength instead of weakness. And since then, he's been incredibly patient and respectful about everything. Iris fell silent for a long moment, just watching me with those eyes that knew all my secrets and insecurities. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, but I still needed a few seconds to gather the courage to admit it out loud. Yes, very much. Terrifyingly. Completely in love in a way I didn't know was possible to feel. Okay, Iris sighed, returning to the couch and picking up her wine glass again. This is intense and probably kind of reckless, but if he makes you happy and treats you well, then I support it. Just promise you'll be careful, and that you'll tell me if anything goes wrong? I promise. I held her hand, grateful for the unconditional friendship, even when my choices probably seemed crazy to outside eyes. The first moment of true physical intimacy happened on Friday night of the second week, when Roman came to my apartment to watch a movie I'd mentioned wanting to see. We started on the couch with a respectful distance between us, me nestled against the cushions and him sitting with that perfectly controlled posture that seemed to be his default setting. But as the movie progressed, the distance gradually decreased until I was practically leaning against him, my head resting on his shoulder, and Roman's arm around my waist in a loose embrace that was comfortable and safe. That's when he turned his head, and our eyes met, and suddenly the movie was completely forgotten, because the only thing that existed was the intensity of his gaze, and the way the air between us seemed charged with static electricity. The kiss started soft like it always started, lips moving against lips with a gentleness that made my heart melt. But then something changed, an urgency emerging where before there had only been patient sweetness, and when his tongue touched mine for the first time, a small, involuntary sound escaped my throat. Roman responded by pulling my waist more firmly, moving me until I was sitting on his lap, my legs on either side of his hips in a position that should have made me panic, but instead only made heat spread through my entire body. The kisses grew deeper, more urgent, his hands gripping my waist through the thin fabric of my blouse while mine tangled in his hair, pulling lightly in a way that made him groan low against my mouth. I was completely lost in the sensation, in the heat, in the way every cell in my body seemed to be on fire with his proximity, when suddenly Roman broke the kiss and pulled his face away, his breathing coming heavy and irregular. Thea, his voice came out hoarse, tense. We need to stop. Confusion hit me like cold water. Why? Did I do something wrong? No. God, no. He held my face with both hands, forcing me to look directly into his eyes that were darkened by something I was beginning to recognize as desire. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just that if we don't stop now, I'm going to want more. And you're not ready for more. Courage came from somewhere deep, fueled by the heat still pulsing through my veins, and the way he was looking at me like I was something infinitely precious. What if I'm getting ready? His eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise passing through his normally controlled expression. Thea, I trust you, Roman. The words came out firm, even with my heart beating so hard I was sure he could feel it through the layers of clothing between us. More than I've trusted anyone in my entire life. I know, and that's... He closed his eyes for a second, as if fighting something internally. That's exactly why it can't be today. Not like this, on the couch watching a movie like it's something casual. When it happens, and if it happens, it needs to be because you're absolutely sure of what you want, and it needs to be perfect. The vulnerability that had started to creep in surfaced again, that hateful voice in the back of my head whispering poisonous doubts. Are you sure you want me, even with all my inexperience? Even knowing I probably won't know what to do or how to do it right? The change in him was instant. The hands holding my face became firmer, almost possessive, and when he spoke, his voice was loaded with an intensity that made something inside my chest tighten painfully. Thea Sinclair, I want you exactly as you are. Your purity, your innocence, your kindness, Your way of seeing the world as if there's still hope in it. Everything. Every part of you. I'm obsessed with you in a way that borders on unhealthy. Obsessed? The word came out in a whisper as I processed the raw confession. Completely, dangerously, pathologically obsessed. He pressed his forehead against mine, his ice-gray eyes burning with something so intense it almost hurt to look at directly. You're everything good in a world full of shit. You're the only pure thing I've touched in years, and I'm going to protect that. Protect you, with every breath I have. The emotion came in a wave so strong it left me speechless. So instead of trying to talk, I simply pulled him back into a kiss that was different from the others, loaded not just with attraction, but with something deeper, more meaningful, more permanent. When we separated this time, I was trembling slightly, and Roman pulled me into a tight embrace that made me feel safe in a way that had nothing to do with physical protection and everything to do with emotional connection. I trust you, I whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath my palm. Completely, and I'll never break that trust. The promise came firm, absolute, sealed with a kiss on my forehead that was so full of reverence, I felt tears start to burn in my eyes. Never, Thea. You have my word. And in that moment, nestled in the arms of a man the world knew as dangerous, but who with me was just gentle, patient, and completely devoted, I knew with absolute certainty that I was lost in a way I would never want to be found. Roman Volkov had captured me completely, body and soul, and I was more than willing to let him keep me. Chapter 3. Garrett and Consequences.
He won't bother you.
Life had acquired a strangely comfortable routine over the past few weeks, with Roman becoming such a constant presence in my existence that I'd almost started to forget the world outside our dating bubble still existed and kept spinning with its own dramas and complications. That's why Garrett Walsh's arrival at the library caught me completely off guard, like a stone thrown into the calm surface of a lake that until then had been perfectly tranquil. Garrett showed up Monday morning, a few minutes after I opened the library for the day, with a confident smile and a folder of documents indicating he was the new employee management had mentioned hiring the previous week. He was attractive in a conventional way that probably worked well for him in most social situations, with brown hair slicked back, bright green eyes, and a kind of easy charm I immediately distrusted for reasons I couldn't fully name. "Hi, you must be Thea." He extended his hand with that smile that had probably been practiced in front of a mirror. "They said you're the best person to show me how things work around here and train me on the system." I shook his hand briefly, before releasing it, keeping a professional and polite expression, even as discomfort was already starting to creep across my skin. "Welcome to the library. I'll show you how everything works and walk you through the cataloging system we use." The first few hours were normal enough, with Garrett asking appropriate questions about the work and paying attention to the explanations I gave about the library's procedures. But then, as we approached lunchtime, something shifted in how he interacted with me, a familiarity emerging where before there had only been professional interest. "Do you eat lunch here or usually go out?" The question came with a look that was clearly more than casual curiosity about work routines. "I could take you to check out some cool places nearby, since you probably know the area better than I do." The answer came automatically, polite but firm in the way I'd learned to be after the situation with Derek. "I have a boyfriend, Garrett. But thanks for the offer. I expected that to be enough, that mentioning a boyfriend would establish the necessary boundaries and end any romantic interest before it could develop into something problematic. But Garrett just smiled in that way, that indicated he didn't see my relationship as a real obstacle. "Does he come have lunch with you sometimes?" The question was asked with a calculated lightness that made my stomach tighten with a bad feeling. "Not always. He works far from here." I started to explain before realizing I was justifying something that didn't need justification. "So he probably wouldn't mind me keeping you company during lunch once in a while, right? Just as colleagues. Nothing major." The smile stayed firm, but there was something in his eyes that showed he knew exactly what he was doing. "Garrett," I tried to keep my voice calm and professional, even as irritation was starting to bubble beneath the surface. "I really prefer to keep things strictly professional here at work. Nothing personal. I just think it's better that way." He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender that was completely theatrical and not genuine. "No problem. Just being friendly, but I completely understand." Except he didn't understand, or chose not to understand, because the following days brought a constant series of invitations for coffee, comments about how pretty I looked in certain colors, jokes about my invisible boyfriend who never showed up, and a general insistence that was rapidly approaching harassment territory. By Wednesday, I was visibly tense every time Garrett approached my workstation, my shoulders automatically stiffening, and my expression closing into a mask of cold professionalism that I hoped would finally make him get the message. You know this boyfriend of yours probably isn't that serious if he never shows up here, Garrett commented casually, while pretending to look for a book in the section near my desk. Maybe you should consider expanding your options, meeting new people. That's when my patience finally ran out completely. Garrett, I've already said several times that I have a boyfriend and I'm not interested. You need to stop this now. Wow, relax. I was just talking. The defensiveness in his voice was irritating because he knew exactly what he was doing and was trying to make me feel like I was overreacting. I spent the rest of the day avoiding unnecessary interactions with him, and when I finally got home that night, I was so frustrated and emotionally drained I could barely eat the dinner I'd prepared. That's when my phone rang with the personalized ringtone I'd set for Roman, and just seeing his name on the screen made some of the stress start to dissolve. "Hi," I answered, and even to me my voice sounded tired. "What happened?" The response came immediately, his voice loaded with concern he didn't even try to hide. "You sound upset." The urge to downplay it came by instinct, to say everything was fine, and not worry him with something I should be able to handle myself. But the honesty we'd built between us demanded more than comforting lies. "There's a new guy at work who isn't taking no for an answer," I admitted, sitting on the couch and pulling my legs underneath me. "He keeps hitting on me even after I made it clear I have a boyfriend and I'm not interested, and it's starting to get really uncomfortable." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but when Roman spoke again, his voice had changed to that icy tone I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. "Name." "Roman, you don't need to do anything drastic," I started, but he cut me off gently. "Thea." His name. It wasn't a request. It was a calm but absolutely final order. I sighed, knowing arguing would be useless when he used that tone. "Garrett Walsh. But please don't do anything too over the top. I don't want him to lose his job or something. I'll take care of it." The promise came loaded with a certainty that should have worried me, but instead brought a traitorous relief. "He'll stop bothering you. You have my word." How? I needed to know, needed to understand what exactly "take care of it" meant in the vocabulary of a man who controlled a criminal organization. "Leave it to me, Solnishko." The Russian nickname he'd started using came out with that softness that always made my heart race. "No one bothers you without facing consequences. No one." The possessiveness in the statement should have sent warning signals, should have made me question the dynamics of our relationship and whether it was healthy to have someone so protective in a way that bordered on territorial. But instead, it just made that familiar warmth spread through my chest, the feeling of being protected and valued overriding any rational concern. 2 days passed without anything obviously dramatic happening, and I'd almost started to think maybe Roman had decided to let things run their natural course. But then Garrett arrived late Friday morning, and just by looking at him I knew something had happened. He was pale in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sun, his eyes wide with something that looked dangerously close to barely contained panic. His hands trembled slightly when he tried to turn on the computer, and I noticed he looked at me with a mixture of fear and something that could have been newly discovered respect. "Garrett, are you okay?" one of our colleagues asked mid-morning, obviously worried about his appearance. "You're very pale. You look like you've seen a ghost." I had some problems with my car, and with the bank, and some other things." His voice came out tense, and then he turned to look at me directly with an urgency that caught me completely off guard. "Thea, do you know Roman Volkov?" My stomach sank even as I kept my expression carefully neutral. "I do." "Why? He's your boyfriend?" The question came out almost like a strangled shout, loaded with disbelief and what seemed to be genuine terror. "Yes, he is," I confirmed calmly, watching the way the color drained even more from his face, until he was practically gray. "Why are you asking?" Garrett ran his hand through his hair with nervous agitation, looking around as if checking whether anyone was listening before lowering his voice to an urgent whisper. "I didn't know. I thought you were making up having a boyfriend. I thought it was just a polite excuse. I never would have, if I'd known who he was." "Roman talked to you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the way Garrett was reacting. "Not exactly talked. No." He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, just barely contained hysteria. "But my car was towed 3 times in the last 2 days for violations I didn't commit. My credit card was blocked for suspected fraud even though I haven't made any strange transactions. And yesterday someone showed up at my house to check business licenses I don't even have because I don't have any business." The pattern was becoming clear, and I could see Roman's hand in every carefully orchestrated inconvenience that had made Garrett's last few days absolutely miserable, without technically causing any real or permanent harm. "And then last night someone stopped me on the street," Garrett continued, his voice getting even lower and tenser. "A big guy who gave me a very simple message: stop bothering the girl or things are going to get much worse. And I got the message perfectly. "Garrett, I'm sorry," I started, genuinely torn between relief that he'd finally understood and guilt that he'd been scared this way. "No!" He raised his hands as if defending himself from a physical attack. "Don't be sorry. I'm the one who's sorry. I should have accepted the first no you gave me. I should have respected it when you said you had a boyfriend. Please, please tell him I got it, that I'll never talk to you about anything that isn't strictly work-related again." The desperate sincerity in his voice was almost comical. If it weren't so obvious, he was genuinely terrified. "I'll talk to him, Garrett. You don't need to worry. Thank you." The relief that passed across his face was instant and immense. "Seriously, thank you so much. And again, sorry for everything. I was a complete idiot." For the rest of the day, Garrett avoided me like I was radioactive, keeping any necessary interaction to the absolute minimum, and never, not even once, making any comment that could be interpreted as flirting or personal interest. As soon as I could take a break, I went to the bathroom and called Roman, torn between justified irritation and something more complicated I didn't want to examine too closely. He answered on the first ring. "Thea, Roman Volkov. You destroyed this man's life." The accusation came out before I could think better of it, loaded with frustration even though a traitorous part of me was secretly satisfied with the result. Temporarily, the answer came completely unconcerned, as if we were discussing the weather and not financial and psychological harassment. "Everything will go back to normal as soon as he proves he understood the lesson and continues respecting boundaries. You can't just do this every time someone annoys me at work," I argued, even knowing I was fighting a losing battle. "I don't do it with everyone, only with those who stalk and harass you after you make it clear you're not interested." The distinction was made with logic that was hard to contest. Garrett had multiple chances to stop and chose to ignore your discomfort. He deserved to be scared a little. I pressed my free hand against my forehead, feeling the beginning of a headache throbbing at my temples. "Okay, I admit you have a valid point again. But still, this is excessive. Are you mad at me?" The question came softer, loaded with something that sounded vulnerable, in a way Roman rarely allowed his voice to show. And there was the problem, because as much as my rational head said I should be irritated with the way he'd manipulated the situation, my heart was singing with the knowledge that he cared enough to act, that my comfort and safety were important enough to him to take measures. I should be, I admitted honestly, because lying had never been part of what we built, but I'm not. Part of me finds this absurdly protective, even though it's clearly excessive. "I'm possessive about what's mine, Thea." The words came loaded with an intensity that made my heart skip. "And you're mine, completely, absolutely mine." The heat that spread through my entire body with that declaration had nothing to do with room temperature, and everything to do with the way Roman could make me feel precious and desired with just a few carefully chosen words. Possessive is a very strong word. I tried to sound reproachful, but my voice came out too weak to be convincing. It's the right word, and you know it. I could hear the smile in his voice now, that masculine satisfaction of having won an argument that hadn't really even been a discussion. "Come have dinner with me tonight. I want to see you. I want to make sure you're okay after all this stress with Garrett." The urge to say yes was almost overwhelming, but there were responsibilities that needed to be considered. I have to finish cataloging the new books that came in. "Leave it for Monday." The suggestion came firm, persuasive. "One night away from work won't make a difference, and you deserve to relax after the week you've had." He was right. And besides, the idea of spending the evening with Roman was infinitely more attractive than staying alone in the apartment, mentally reviewing all the strange interactions with Garrett. "Okay, dinner." I gave in, and the happiness I heard in his voice when he responded made something inside my chest melt completely. "I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable. Nothing formal." Roman arrived exactly at 7 like he always did, his punctuality one of the many things I'd learned to appreciate over the weeks. But instead of taking me to one of the elegant restaurants we normally frequented, he took me to his apartment, a surprise that made my eyebrows rise in silent question. "I thought we could have a quiet night here," he explained as he guided me inside, his hand at the small of my back in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "I ordered food from your favorite Thai restaurant, and we can watch that documentary about historical libraries you mentioned wanting to see." The fact that he'd remembered these small details about my preferences made something warm spread through my chest, the attention to detail showing how much he really paid attention to everything I said. The evening flowed with the ease that had become our trademark, conversations interspersed with comfortable silences as we ate and watched the documentary, but there was an underlying current of tension that had nothing to do with discomfort, and everything to do with the constant awareness of each other, the way every accidental touch sent small waves of electricity across the skin. When the documentary ended, I was nestled against his side on the couch, my head resting on Roman's shoulder, and his fingers tracing distracted patterns on my arm in a way that was both relaxing and disturbing. "Thank you for taking care of the situation with Garrett," I said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "Even though your methods are questionable, I appreciate that you care enough to act. I'll always take care of you, Thea." The promise came firm, absolute. "Anyone who makes you feel uncomfortable or threatened will have to deal with me. That's non-negotiable." I turned my head to look at him, studying studying the strong profile illuminated by the room's soft light. You realize this is intense, right? That most people would find this level of protection over the top? He turned to face me, his ice gray eyes burning with that intensity that always made my heart race. I'm not most people, and you're not just another girlfriend. You're the only pure and good thing I've touched in years, and I'm going to protect that with everything I have. The words should have sounded excessive, too dramatic to be taken seriously. But the way he spoke, with absolute conviction and raw vulnerability, made them sound like the simplest truth in the world. I love you. The words escaped before I could think them through. 3 simple words that carried the weight of everything I was feeling, and the moment they came out, I knew they were true in a way that couldn't be questioned. Roman went completely still for a few seconds, his eyes widening slightly with genuine surprise, and then something shifted in his expression, a softness emerging where normally there was only careful control. I love you too. The confession came hoarse, loaded with emotion he rarely allowed to show. More than I thought it would be possible to love someone, more than is probably safe or healthy. The kiss that followed was different from all the others, loaded not just with desire, but with the declaration we'd just exchanged, with the promise of everything those 3 words meant. And when we finally pulled apart, both breathless and trembling slightly, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd found exactly what I'd been waiting for all these years. Real connection, true love. Roman Volkov, in all his dangerous intensity and absolute devotion, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I won't judge Thea. After all, who hasn't said they loved someone after only a few days of knowing them, right? Chapter 4, Everyday Life in Iris.
I'll wait.
The following weeks brought a strange and wonderful normalcy to my life, with Roman becoming part of my daily routine in a way that seemed to have always belonged there. He showed up at my apartment after work with grocery bags and prepared elaborate dinners in my tiny kitchen while I watched, fascinated by how those hands I knew were capable of violence could be so gentle when chopping vegetables or seasoning meat. It was in moments like these that I saw the man behind the terrifying reputation, the Roman who existed when the masks fell away, and he could simply be human instead of head of the Bratva. And it was in one of these moments, a Friday night when we were sharing a bottle of wine while he cooked something that smelled absolutely divine, that the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I frowned because I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door and saw Iris standing in the hallway with that determined expression I knew all too well, I immediately knew the night had just gotten much more interesting and potentially complicated. "Surprise!" Iris announced, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes that were already looking over my shoulder toward the kitchen where the sounds of someone cooking were coming from. "Thought I'd stop by to see how you are, since you've been avoiding me the last few weeks." Guilt hit me because she was right. I'd been so absorbed in the relationship with Roman that I'd neglected my best friend in a way that wasn't fair to her. "I haven't been avoiding you exactly," I started to protest weakly, but she just arched an eyebrow in a look that clearly said she wasn't buying that weak excuse. That's when Roman appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel, and his presence filled the small space of my entryway in a way that was both impressive and slightly intimidating. "You must be Iris," he said, and there was a genuine kindness in his voice that I knew he reserved only for people important to me. Iris studied him with the clinical eyes of a nurse, assessing every detail of his appearance from his dark hair to the way he positioned himself between me and the door, in a manner that was protective without being suffocating. "And you must be the man who's obsessed with my best friend." The direct comment made my eyes widen in shock, but Roman just smiled in that small way that meant he was genuinely amused rather than offended. "Guilty as charged. Want to come in? I'm making dinner and there's more than enough food for 3 people. Iris looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded quickly, opening the door wider to let her pass. She entered with that confident walk that was pure Iris, settling on my couch with the familiarity of someone who had spent countless nights there over the years. What followed was basically an interrogation disguised as polite conversation, with Iris asking questions that seemed casual on the surface, but that I knew were carefully calculated to assess exactly what kind of man Roman was, and whether he deserved to be in my life. "So Roman, what are your intentions with Thea?" The question came direct, no beating around the bush, and I wanted to sink into the couch from pure embarrassment. "Iris!" I protested, but Roman just touched my shoulder gently in a gesture that said it was okay. "Serious," he answered, maintaining direct eye contact with Iris in a way that showed he wasn't afraid of her scrutiny. "My intentions are completely serious." "Define serious." Iris crossed her arms, assuming the posture I recognized as her full protective mode. "She's mine. Permanently. I have no intention of letting her go or treating her like something temporary or disposable. The words came loaded with absolute conviction that made my heart race even as Iris processed the statement. Possessive, Iris commented, and it wasn't clear if it was approval or criticism. Extremely. Roman didn't deny it, accepting the label with the same ease he accepted most things related to his feelings for me, but also protective, dedicated, and completely devoted to her well-being. Iris fell silent for a moment, studying Roman with that intensity she normally reserved for difficult patients, and then she leaned forward with an expression that suddenly became much more serious and slightly threatening. If you hurt her in any way, physically or emotionally, I will hunt you down personally. The threat came calmly, but loaded with absolute sincerity. I don't care who you are or what kind of power you have. She's my family, and I protect my family. To my surprise, Roman smiled with what seemed to be genuine approval. I would expect nothing less from someone who truly cares about her. And you can relax, because I'd kill anyone who threatens Thea. That would include myself if I'm ever stupid enough to hurt her, which I have no intention of being. The answer caught Iris off guard. I could see it in her eyes, and after a few more seconds of silent assessment, she finally relaxed her posture and nodded once as if an important decision had been made. Okay, you passed the test, she announced, and the relief I felt was so intense it almost made me dizzy. You're intense in a way that's probably not entirely healthy, but you seem genuine. Just don't be an idiot, Volkov. I don't intend to be, Roman assured her, and then he went back to the kitchen to finish dinner, while Iris and I exchanged looks that communicated volumes without needing words. The rest of the night flowed surprisingly well, with Iris gradually relaxing as she watched Roman interact with me with that gentle care that had become so familiar. She observed the way he served me first, how he constantly checked if I needed anything, how he listened with total attention when I talked about my day. When Iris finally left a few hours later, she pulled me into a tight hug in the hallway and whispered in my ear, "He really loves you. I can see it. Just be careful with his world, okay?" I will be, I promised, and when I closed the door and went back to find Roman cleaning the kitchen, I felt a wave of gratitude for having people who cared enough to protect me, even when I didn't necessarily need protection. The following days established a routine that was comfortable in a way I'd never experienced before in any relationship. Roman started spending more and more time at my apartment, showing up after work and staying until late at night, sometimes even falling asleep on my couch when conversations stretched on for hours. I loved watching him move through my small space, the way he seemed so out of place with his expensive suits and commanding presence, but at the same time perfectly at home. He cooked for me when I came home tired from work, massaged my shoulders when they got tense from leaning over books all day, and sat in comfortable silence reading reports on his tablet while I got lost in historical novels on the other side of the couch. It was domestic in a way that should have been boring, but instead was perfect, the simple normalcy being exactly what we both needed after living lives that were complicated in different ways. One night, after he'd fallen asleep on the couch again, I watched him for a few minutes, before gently touching his shoulder to wake him. He opened his eyes immediately, that instinct of always being alert, activating before he was even fully conscious. "You don't have to sleep on the couch," I said softly, aware that I was offering something that carried significant weight. "You can sleep in my bed, with me." Roman got very quiet for a moment, just looking at me with those ice-gray eyes that seemed to see directly through all my defenses. "Thea, if I sleep in your bed with you, I won't be able to control myself the way I need to control myself." Heat rose to my cheeks, but I held his gaze with courage that was growing with every day we spent together. "What if I don't want you to control yourself that much?" The reaction was immediate, his eyes darkening with something I was learning to recognize as desire, but he shook his head slowly as if fighting something internally. "Are you ready to take that step?" The question made me pause because the truth was complicated. Almost. I'm almost ready, but I'm still afraid of not being good at it, of disappointing you when it finally happens. Roman sat up completely, pulling me onto his lap in a smooth movement that left me breathless, and held my face with both hands, in a gesture that was so full of tenderness I felt tears start to burn in my eyes. "Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you." His voice was low, but loaded with absolute intensity. "When this happens, and it will happen when you're completely ready and not a second before, it's going to be perfect. Not because you'll do everything right, or because you'll know exactly what to do, but because it'll be you, and everything about you is already perfect for me. You can't know that." I started to argue, but he cut me off with a soft kiss that effectively silenced any objection. "I know," he said against my lips. "I know because I know you, because I trust you completely, because every moment I spend with you is better than anything I've experienced before. So stop worrying about disappointing me, because it's literally impossible." The absolute conviction in his words made something inside my chest release, a tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying finally dissolving. In Roman's office a few days later, Victor made a casual comment that resulted in one of the most entertaining conversations I'd witnessed between them. "Boss, You still haven't taken the next step with her? Victor asked, with that lack of filter that apparently came from years of friendship. Roman looked at him with an expression that would have terrified anyone else. No, she's a virgin, in case you forgot. I'm waiting until she's completely ready. You? Waiting? The man who never waits for anything in his entire life? Victor seemed genuinely shocked in a way that was almost comical. She really has completely changed you. For her? Roman answered with absolute simplicity. I'd wait years if necessary. Decades. Her timing is what matters, not mine. Victor just shook his head with obvious amusement. You're so in love. It's weird seeing you this human, boss, and watching the exchange between them. Accustomed now to being present in these moments of Roman's world, I couldn't help but smile because Victor was right. Roman was different with me. Softer, more patient, more human. And I loved every version of him I discovered with each passing day. Chapter 5. Meeting, Victor, and Intimacy.
I'll wait.
All right.
Dinner with Victor happened at an elegant Italian restaurant downtown, and my nervousness increased with every passing minute as Roman drove there with that characteristic calm that made it seem like meetings like this were routine for him. They probably were, but for me, officially meeting the right-hand man of the man I was dating felt like too important a step to be treated so casually. Victor was already waiting when we arrived, sitting at a table in the corner of the restaurant with that relaxed but alert posture that suggested he was constantly assessing everything around him. When he saw us approaching, a wide smile lit up his face, and there was obvious amusement in his blue eyes that immediately made me both nervous and curious about what exactly he found so funny. "So you're the girl who tamed the boss," Victor said as soon as we sat down, and his tone carried genuine humor that made it impossible to take offense at the words. I laughed, feeling the familiar heat rise to my cheeks as I tried to formulate a response that didn't sound completely lame. Tamed is a very strong word to describe what's happening here. No, it's the absolutely perfect word. Victor leaned forward with his eyes gleaming with barely contained amusement. He smiles now. Do you understand how significant that is? Roman never smiled before you showed up in his life. Never. Not once in all the years I've worked for him. I turned my head to look at Roman, who was visibly irritated with the direction the conversation had taken, an almost imperceptible tension in his jawline that I'd learned to recognize as discomfort. Victor, are you absolutely sure you want to keep talking in this direction? Completely sure, boss. Victor ignored the veiled threat with the ease of someone who knew Roman well enough to know exactly how far he could push without real consequences. And he's patient now, too. Boss was never patient with absolutely anything in his entire life. But with you, it's like watching a completely different man. Maybe he's patient with me because I deserve patience, I said softly, touching Roman's hand on the table in a gesture of silent solidarity. Victor fell silent for a moment, studying me with that intensity that suggested he was reassessing who I was and what exactly I represented in Roman's life, because you matter. You're the first person in years, maybe decades, who really matters to him in a personal way and not just strategic. The raw sincerity in the statement made something tighten in my chest, and I squeezed Roman's hand a little tighter, wanting him to know without words that the feeling was completely mutual. Victor, how long have you known Roman exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about the history between the two men who clearly shared more than just a professional relationship. 15 years, since he took over. The answer came casually, but carried weight I could feel even without fully understanding the context. Took over? I echoed, confused about what exactly that word meant in this specific context. The bratva, when his father died. Victor clarified, and I immediately felt Roman go completely still beside me, his muscles stiffening in a way that indicated we'd just stepped into extremely dangerous and painful territory. The question came out before I could think better of it, guided by genuine curiosity and the desire to better understand the man I was falling more and more in love with. Were you close? You and your father? No. Roman's answer came so cold and final that it effectively froze any attempt at further exploration of that topic, his voice carrying a kind of cutting ice I rarely heard directed at or near me. I didn't push. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I just took his hand under the table, intertwining our fingers in a gesture of silent comfort that said without words that I understood, that I respected the clearly established boundaries, that I wasn't going to demand explanations for things he obviously wasn't ready to share. Roman turned his head to look at me, and there was genuine surprise in his ice-gray eyes, as if no one had offered comfort without demands before, as if he expected me to insist on answers and was disappointed when I simply accepted what he was willing to give. The word came low, almost a whisper, loaded with gratitude that went far beyond the specific moment. I just nodded, squeezing his hand once more before returning my attention to Victor, who was watching our exchange with a thoughtful expression that suggested he was reaching conclusions about me that were probably deeper than I was comfortable being analyzed. The visit to Roman's apartment happened 3 days after dinner with Victor, and the magnitude of the space left me completely speechless, in a way that made him smile with that silent satisfaction I was learning to love. It wasn't simply an apartment in the traditional sense of the word. It was practically an entire floor of one of the most luxurious buildings in the city, with huge floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the city lights, spreading to the distant horizon. "This is huge." It was literally all I could say, slowly spinning in the middle of the living room that was bigger than my entire apartment times 3, my eyes trying to absorb every detail of the minimalist but clearly expensive decor. "It's safe, isolated from the rest of the world, and now it's yours too if you want." Roman watched my reaction with that total attention he always devoted to me, as if every expression that crossed my face was important and deserved to be memorized. I stopped spinning to look at him directly, confusion coloring my voice. "Mine? What do you mean mine?" He walked to where I was standing, his hands finding my waist in a gesture that had become so familiar and comforting. "You can come here whenever you want. Stay as long as you want. Consider this space an extension of your own. I want you in my life completely, Thea, not just in compartmentalized or separate pieces." The weight of what he was offering made my heart squeeze in a way that was both scary and absolutely wonderful. "This is a very big step. Are you sure?" "More sure than I've ever been about anything in my entire life." He pulled a key from his pocket that had clearly been prepared before I even arrived, extending it to me. "This is yours, to use when you need or want to." Roman's kitchen was a work of art in stainless steel and black marble, with professional appliances that probably cost more than a new car. He had insisted on preparing dinner for me instead of ordering food, and I sat on the high counter, watching him move through the space with that natural efficiency that suggested frequent practice. I don't know exactly when the atmosphere changed, when casual conversation gave way to something more charged and intense, but suddenly Roman was standing between my legs, where I sat on the counter, his hands on my waist, and his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe properly. The first kiss was soft, almost hesitant, but quickly deepened into something more urgent and needy. His hands gripped my waist through the thin fabric of my blouse, pulling me closer until there was practically no space between our bodies, and I automatically wrapped my legs around his hips in a position that should have made me panic, but instead only intensified the heat spreading through my entire body. When his mouth left mine and began to trace a slow and deliberate path along my jawline toward my neck, a completely involuntary sound escaped my throat, something between a sigh and a moan that I'd never made before, and that made Roman pause for a fraction of a second before continuing his attention to my neck. And then suddenly he stopped completely, pulling his face away and looking at me with eyes darkened by desire, but also by something that looked like intense internal struggle, his breathing coming heavy and irregular in a way that mirrored my own. "Thea, we need to stop." The words came hoarse, tense, loaded with obvious effort. Or, the question escaped before I could think better of it, my own voice sounding strange and breathless. "Or I take you to the bedroom and we don't stop." The raw honesty in the statement made my heart skip several beats. Courage came from somewhere deep, fueled by the heat still pulsing through my veins. "What if I want to go to the bedroom?" Roman went completely still, just looking at me with an intensity that seemed capable of burning me from the inside out, and I could see the internal struggle happening behind those ice-gray eyes. "Are you sure of what you're saying?" And there was the complicated truth, because a large part of me desperately wanted to take that step, but another part was still scared of all the ways I might not be enough. I'm almost sure. "But not today, Roman. I need a little more time to be absolutely certain." No disappointment appeared in his expression. Instead, Roman just kissed my forehead with that reverence that always made my heart melt completely. The gesture so full of tenderness I felt tears start to burn in my eyes. "I'll wait. I'll always wait as long as you need. Thank you for being so patient with me," I whispered, touching his face with fingers that trembled slightly. "Thank you for trusting me enough to consider taking that step eventually," he responded, holding my hand against his face. "You have no idea what it means to me." And there, in his kitchen with my legs still around his hips and my heart beating fast, I knew I was falling in love in a way I would never want to recover from. Chapter 6. His World and Reality.
This is my world.
The visit to Roman's actual workplace happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 weeks after we started dating, and it was in that moment that I finally understood the complete difference between the man he was with me and the man the rest of the world knew and feared. He had invited me casually during breakfast at his apartment, mentioning he had some matters to handle and asking if I wanted to come along to see where he spent most of his days. At the time, it seemed like a simple and even sweet offer in a way, an attempt to include me more completely in his life, to not keep parts separate and compartmentalized. But when the car stopped in front of a large warehouse in the city's industrial zone, with discreet but obviously armed guards positioned at strategic points around the perimeter, I began to understand I was about to see a side of Roman that until now had been carefully kept away from me. The interior of the warehouse was exactly what I should have expected, but still caught me completely off guard. Large, intimidating men moved through the space with clear purpose, many of them carrying weapons as casually as if they were common work accessories. Conversations in Russian ricocheted off the concrete walls, the tense and serious tones making it clear that the matters being discussed were important and probably dangerous. And Roman at the center of it all was a completely different figure from the man who cooked for me in his kitchen, or who held my hand while we watched movies on the couch. Here he was, pure authority, condensed into human form, his posture more upright, his movements more calculated, his expression absolutely controlled in a way that was both impressive and slightly terrifying. Men who looked perfectly capable of breaking bones with their bare hands bowed slightly when Roman passed, their respectful looks bordering on reverent fear. Orders were given in rapid Russian, and were followed immediately without questions, each word from him carrying absolute weight that left no room for disobedience or hesitation. Roman noticed my discomfort almost immediately, because he always noticed everything related to me, turning his head to look at me with those penetrating eyes that seemed capable of reading every thought passing through my head. "You want to leave? I can take you back to the apartment if this is too much." The offer was genuine and tempting, but it also felt wrong in a way, as if accepting would be a rejection not just of the space, but of the person he was when he wasn't with me. "No, I don't want to leave. It's just different seeing you here than at my apartment or yours. Here, you're a completely different person." Something that looked almost like vulnerability passed quickly through his eyes. "This is my world, Thea. Violent, dangerous, full of things I'd prefer you never have to witness. Do you still want to be part of this knowing what it really means?" The answer came from deep in my heart, without hesitation or second thought. "I want to be part of your life, all of it. And that includes your world, even the parts that are scary or hard to process." Something in him broke in that moment, a raw emotion crossing his normally controlled expression, in a way I'd never seen before. "No one's ever said that to me. No one's ever wanted the difficult parts along with the easy parts." I held his hand, squeezing hard, even conscious that probably half the people in the warehouse were watching us. "Then I'm the first. And you deserve someone who accepts you completely, Roman, not just the convenient pieces." The meeting Roman needed to conduct happened in a closed room on the warehouse's second floor, and Victor appeared to keep me company while we waited, guiding me to a waiting area that had surprisingly comfortable chairs and a coffee machine that seemed completely out of place in the industrial environment. "Are you afraid of him?" Victor asked after a few minutes of silence, the question coming casually, but loaded with genuine curiosity. "Of Roman? No." The answer came automatically because it was simple and absolute truth. "Even knowing what he does? What he's capable of doing when necessary?" Victor leaned forward, studying my face with that analytical intensity that seemed to be characteristic of all the men who worked for Roman. "He would never be violent with me. Of that, I'm absolutely certain." I spoke with conviction that came from weeks observing the way Roman treated me like something infinitely precious that needed to be protected. "How do you know with such certainty?" The question wasn't challenging, just genuinely curious about the source of my confidence. I thought for a moment before responding, trying to articulate something that was more intuitive feeling than rational logic. "Because when he looks at me, I see a different man. Not the boss, not the head of the Bratva, just Roman, the person underneath all the masks and roles the world demands he wear." Victor fell silent for a long moment, processing my words with a thoughtful expression. "You're good for him, you know? He needs someone who sees the man instead of the reputation. Someone who makes him remember he's still human underneath it all." The accidental discovery happened when I was going to the bathroom, passing through a hallway that seemed empty but clearly wasn't. Sounds were coming from a nearby room, and before I could process that I should move away and pretend I hadn't heard anything. My brain had already registered the words being shouted. "I don't know anything. I swear I don't know!" The man's voice was loaded with terror and pain, and each word came out louder and more desperate than the last. "You have 10 seconds to change your mind about that answer." Roman's voice came icy in a way I'd never heard directed at me, each word cutting like broken glass. "And I strongly suggest you use those seconds wisely." The sound of a slap echoed through the hallway, followed by a muffled scream, and I froze completely in place, my body refusing to move even while my brain screamed to run, to get out of there, to not hear anything more that would solidify the reality of what Roman really did when he wasn't being gentle and patient with me. Victor appeared out of nowhere, taking me by the arm firmly, but not brutally, and quickly guiding me away from that room. "Come on, Thea. You shouldn't be hearing this. He's hurting that man." The words came out weak, shocked, loaded with a reality that until now had been more theoretical than concrete. "He's interrogating. It's part of the job, part of what needs to be done to keep the organization running and protect the people under his protection." Victor spoke with practicality that suggested scenes like that were completely normal for him. "I need air. Now," I managed to say, feeling the warehouse suddenly seem too small, the air too thin, everything pressing around me in a way that made it hard to breathe properly. The car was in heavy silence as Roman drove, neither of us knowing exactly what to say or how to break the tension that had settled between us like a physical wall. Victor had obviously told him about what I'd heard, and his jaw was tense in a way that indicated he was preparing for a difficult conversation. "You heard." It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. "Yes, I heard." There was no point in lying or pretending it hadn't happened. "And now you're afraid of me." His voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear something underneath that sounded dangerously close to resignation. "Not of you specifically, of what you do maybe, of the violence that's part of your world." I tried to articulate the difference because it was important, because he needed to understand that my fear wasn't of him as a person, but of the realities of his lifestyle. "I can't change that, Thea. This is who I am, what I do to maintain control and protect what's mine." Each word came heavy with acceptance that this could be the end of us. "But you're different with me. You're kind and patient and would never hurt me," I argued, feeling tears start to burn in my eyes because I didn't want this to be the end. Not when I'd found something so rare and precious. "Because with you, I can be different. With you, I have permission to be just a man instead of the boss." He stopped the car on the shoulder, turning to look at me directly. "But the rest still exists, Thea. The violence, the danger, all the ugly parts you just heard. That doesn't disappear just because I want to be better for you." Tears started to fall before I could stop them. "I know that, and it's scary and hard to process, but I still love you. Even scared, even knowing what you do, I still love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone." Roman went completely still, his eyes widening slightly with something that looked like genuine shock. "You love me, even after today?" "Yes, I love you. So much. Completely," I admitted through tears. "And that scares me as much as anything I heard in that warehouse." Something shifted in his expression, all the tension draining as he reached to wipe away my tears with surprisingly gentle fingers. "I love you too, Thea, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You're the first pure and good thing that's entered my life in decades, and the idea of losing you—" "You're not going to lose me," I interrupted, taking his hand and squeezing hard. "I just need time to process all of this, to understand how to balance the man I know with the reality of what you do." We sat there in the parked car, processing the weight of everything that had been said and unsaid, and when he finally pulled me into a tight embrace, I allowed myself to melt into him, letting love overcome fear, even knowing the journey ahead would be complicated. Well, now Thea truly saw how violent Roman's world is. Is she really going to be able to stick around after this? Chapter 7. Serena and Jealousy.
She's my present.
What?
The social event was exactly the kind of thing I normally avoided with all my strength. One of those formal charity dinners where rich and powerful people gathered to pretend they cared about causes while really just showing off wealth and making strategic connections. Roman had made it clear that his presence was mandatory for political reasons related to his business, and when he asked if I wanted to accompany him, my first instinctive reaction was to politely decline and spend the evening comfortably at home with a book. But then he had looked at me with those ice-gray eyes that always made my heart skip, and said he wanted me by his side, that my presence would make the entire evening more tolerable, and I had given in because I was quickly discovering I was practically incapable of denying anything he asked for with that soft and sincere voice. The dress I chose was simple, but elegant, black and mid-length, nothing too elaborate, because I had no experience with formal events, and didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Roman had shown up at my apartment wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, and the way he had paused upon seeing me, his eyes traveling over my body with obvious appreciation, had made all the nervousness worth it. The event hall was full of people who clearly belonged to that world of luxury and power. Women wearing designer dresses and jewelry that probably cost more than I made in an entire year. Men in impeccable tuxedos discussing business in low tones while waiters circulated with expensive champagne. Roman kept his arm around my waist all night, introducing me to people whose names I immediately forgot, keeping me close to him in a way that was both protective and possessive. That's when she appeared, as we were near the bar. Serena Kozlov was exactly the type of woman I would expect to see on someone like Roman's arm, tall and stunning in a red dress that seemed to have been painted onto her body, black hair falling in perfect waves down her back, and a confidence in her movements that came from someone who knew exactly how much power she had over the men around her. And the way her eyes widened when she saw Roman with me made it absolutely clear that she knew him, and knew him well. Roman. His name came out of her mouth loaded with intimate familiarity. Who is she? I felt Roman's arm tighten around my waist, pulling me even closer to him in a gesture that was unmistakably territorial. My girlfriend. Serena laughed, but there was no genuine humor in the sound, just barely disguised disbelief. Girlfriend? You don't do girlfriends, Roman. You never have. I do now. The answer came simple and final, leaving no room for argument or debate. Serena's eyes assessed me from head to toe in scrutiny that made my skin crawl uncomfortably, and I could see the judgment forming in her expression even before the words came out. She seems too innocent for your world. How long do you think she'll last before she realizes what she's gotten herself into? She's perfect for my world, Roman responded, and the absolute conviction in his voice made something warm spread through my chest, even in the middle of the discomfort of the situation. How long this time? Serena pressed, and there was bitterness starting to leak through the polished facade. You get tired of your distractions quickly. You always have. The irritation that had been growing finally reached boiling point, and the words came out before I could think better of diplomacy or social etiquette. I'm not temporary, and are you? Serena turned all her attention to me, her eyes darkening with something that looked dangerously close to anger. I'm someone who knows him intimately, who understands his world in ways you clearly don't. Past, I responded, keeping my voice firm even with my heart racing. You're his past. I'm present and future. Roman made a low sound that could have been an aborted laugh, and when I quickly looked at him, I saw something that looked like genuine pride shining in his eyes. Let's go, Solnishko. Serena was just leaving. It wasn't a request. It was a polite but absolutely clear order, and Serena clearly got the message because she turned and walked away with stiff steps that showed exactly how irritated she was with the entire interaction. The silence in the car on the way home was heavy with unverbalized thoughts, and I could feel insecurity crawling across my skin like invisible insects as I mentally replayed every detail of the interaction with Serena. She was beautiful in a way I would never be, confident and sophisticated and clearly experienced in all the aspects of life I was still navigating for the first time. She's beautiful. The words escaped before I could stop them, loaded with all the insecurity I was feeling, and clearly very experienced in things I know nothing about. Roman didn't respond immediately, just kept driving with that focused attention he devoted to everything, but I could see the tension in his jawline that indicated he was carefully processing what to say. And I don't want her, Thea. I want you. The statement came firm when he finally spoke, without hesitation or ambiguity. But she knows things I don't know, I insisted, unable to let the insecurity go, even knowing I was being irrational. She has experience I'll never have, knowledge about how to satisfy a man that The car stopped abruptly on the shoulder, and before I could process what was happening, Roman had turned in his seat to look at me directly with an intensity that made my words die in my throat. Thea, do you really think I want you for sexual experience? The question came loaded with something that seemed almost like pain. You think that's what matters to me? I don't know. Frustration leaked along with the words. I just know she clearly knows how to give you things I don't. And that scares me, because what if when it finally happens between us, I'm not good enough? He reached to hold my face with both hands, forcing me to maintain eye contact even when I wanted to look away. Listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you. I don't want you for experience. I want you for who you are. Pure, kind, real, completely genuine in ways no one else in my world is. Serena may have experience, but she never had this. Never had you. What if I disappoint you when it finally happens? The question came out in a vulnerable whisper. Impossible. Completely impossible. And you want to know why? He waited until I nodded before continuing. Because it'll be you, and everything about you, every part of who you are is already perfect for me. Experience doesn't matter. Technique doesn't matter. What matters is the connection between us, and that already exists more deeply than anything I've had with anyone else. Tears started to fall before I could stop them, but they were tears of relief this time, not insecurity. I pulled him into a kiss that was different from the others, loaded not just with love, but with gratitude for his patience, for the way he always knew exactly what to say to calm the fears I couldn't always verbalize adequately. When we pulled apart, I was trembling slightly, but it was a good tremor, fueled by positive emotion instead of fear. I'm almost ready, really this time. Very close to being completely ready to take that step with you. His eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise passing through his normally controlled expression. Are you sure? You don't need to rush anything because of Serena or any insecurity. I'll wait as long as necessary. I know you'll wait. I touched his face with fingers that still trembled a little. But this isn't about rushing. It's about finally being ready to trust completely, to give myself in every way to someone who deserves that trust. He kissed my forehead with that reverence that always made my heart melt. When you're absolutely certain, I promise I'll make it perfect for you. I'll take care of you in every way possible. Chapter 8. Roman's Past and Healing.
I'm here.
The night at Roman's mansion had started like so many others in recent weeks, with a quiet dinner followed by conversations on the couch that stretched into the late hours. When exhaustion finally overcame me, Roman guided me to the guest room with a soft kiss on my forehead and a whispered promise that he'd be right down the hall if I needed anything. I fell asleep quickly, wrapped in sheets that smelled of lavender and comfort, completely unaware of what the early morning would bring. The scream woke me abruptly at 3 a.m., a sound so loaded with pain and terror that for a few seconds, my confused brain couldn't process where it was coming from or what it meant. Then I heard it again, louder this time, words in Russian being shouted with a desperate urgency that made my heart race. Roman. I got out of bed without thinking, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor as I ran down the hallway to his room. The door was ajar, and when I entered, the scene I saw made my chest tighten painfully. He was in bed, his muscular body covered in sweat that made his skin shine under the dim light coming through the windows, shaking in a way that seemed too violent to be just a common nightmare. His hands gripped the sheets hard enough to make his knuckles white, and the screams kept coming out in rapid Russian. I couldn't understand, but that carried an anguish that needed no translation. "Roman," I called softly, approaching the bed cautiously, even knowing he was still asleep. "Roman, wake up." I touched his shoulder gently, and the reaction was instant and terrifying. His eyes flew open suddenly, completely disoriented and wild, and before I could process what was happening, his hand had grabbed my wrist with force that bordered on painful, pulling me down while his body moved in a clearly trained defensive reflex. "It's me." The words came out in a breathless shout, my heart beating so hard it seemed about to explode. "It's me, Roman. It's Thea." Recognition took a few seconds to reach his eyes, confusion gradually giving way to horror when he finally focused on me and realized what he'd done. His hand released my wrist immediately, and he pulled away as if my touch burned. "Thea." His voice came out hoarse, broken. "Did I hurt you?" "No. You didn't hurt me." I held my wrist that still throbbed slightly, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the concern I felt for him. "You just grabbed it. You didn't really hurt me. You were having a nightmare." He sat up in bed, his head falling into his hands in a gesture of defeat that was completely opposite to the confidence he normally displayed. "You shouldn't have seen this. You shouldn't have to deal with this." I sat on the edge of the bed beside him, careful, but determined. "What did you dream about, Roman?" "Nothing important." The answer came automatically, a defense clearly rehearsed from years of hiding vulnerability. "Roman, you were screaming loud enough to wake the entire building. It wasn't nothing." I took his hand, intertwining our fingers. "You can trust me, like I trust you." The silence stretched long enough that I started to think he wasn't going to talk. But then he began, his voice coming out broken and low. "My father, Alexei, he wasn't good. He was cruel, violent in ways most people can't imagine." Each word seemed to cost him physically. "When I was a child, he said he was training me to lead the Bratva, that I needed to be strong. So he beat me, locked me in dark places for days, tested me in ways no child should experience." Tears started to burn in my eyes, but I said nothing, just squeezed his hand tighter. "It continued until I was 16, until I finally got strong enough to fight back." His voice got even lower. "I almost killed him that day. I should have killed him. You were a child, Roman. He abused you in every way possible." Indignation leaked through the words. "He made me what I am, cold, violent, capable of terrible things." Self-accusation was heavy in every syllable. "No." I turned to face him completely. "You're not cold. Not with me. You choose to be different with me because you make me want to be different. But the rest, the violence, the coldness, that's all his fault." His voice broke completely. I had no adequate words, so I just pulled him into a tight embrace, wrapping my arms around him with all the strength I had. "He doesn't define who you are now. You choose who you are every day, and you choose to be good with me, to be kind, to be patient. Those choices are yours, not his." And then Roman broke. He cried in a way that seemed like years of pain finally finding release, his entire body shaking with sobs he'd probably been holding in since adolescence. I just held him, letting the tears soak my nightgown, offering the only comfort I could, constant presence and unconditional acceptance. We stayed like that for an indeterminate time, until the sobs gradually subsided and his breathing finally returned to normal. "Thank you," the word came whispered against my neck. "For what?" "For not being afraid, for not judging me, for staying even after seeing this." He pulled away enough to look at me. "Most people would run. I always stay," I promised, touching his face. "And Roman, you said I'm pure, but you deserve purity too. Peace, love, you deserve everything good. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything. And I'm going to show you that every day for the rest of the time you let me." I pulled him into a kiss that was different from all the others, loaded with healing and complete acceptance. Chapter 9, Threat and Protection.
You're mine.
The next day started with a deceptive normalcy that should have alerted me that something was wrong, because life with Roman had taught me that moments of true peace were rare, and often preceded storms I didn't even know were forming on the horizon. We didn't have much time to enjoy the quiet morning because Roman's phone rang before we could continue the conversation, and the way his expression instantly changed from relaxed to completely controlled told me something serious was happening before he even answered the call. The conversation was in rapid Russian I couldn't follow, but I didn't need to understand the specific words to recognize the tone of voice that indicated significant trouble. When he hung up a few minutes later, the tension was clearly visible in the line of his shoulders and the way his jaw had tightened. "What happened?" I asked, sitting up in bed and pulling the sheet around my body. Roman was silent for a few seconds, clearly calculating how much to tell me versus how much to hide to protect me from unnecessary worries. "We have a situation. Petrov, a rival, found out about you." About us. My stomach sank at the way he said it, loaded with a weight that suggested this was much more serious than he was letting on. "And that's bad? That's potentially very dangerous." He turned to look at me directly, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like fear, an emotion I rarely saw in him. "He's going to try to use you against me. He might try to hurt you to weaken me." Fear came cold and sudden, crawling across my skin like ice. "What are we going to do? You're going to have full protection from now on. Bodyguards who will follow you everywhere. Increased security at your apartment and the library, a driver to take you to and from work." Each item was listed with that controlled efficiency that indicated he'd already thought through every detail. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, Thea. That I promise." The reality of the situation became concrete on Monday, when I returned to work and noticed the discreet but obviously present men who followed me at a carefully calculated distance. They were professional enough not to be obvious to most people, but I'd learned to recognize the signs after weeks in Roman's world, the way they positioned themselves strategically, how their eyes constantly scanned the environment, how their hands always stayed close to where I knew they carried hidden weapons. Roman was more tense than I'd seen him in weeks, the worry clear in every call he made to check if I was okay, in every text asking me to confirm my location, in the way he showed up at the library during lunch hour when he'd normally be busy with important meetings. "You're scaring me," I admitted quietly during one of these impromptu lunches, sitting with him at a nearby cafe while the bodyguards maintained a discreet perimeter around us. "How worried should I be about this?" He held my hand on the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that had become our way of seeking mutual comfort. "I'm not going to lie to you, Thea. Petrov is dangerous. He doesn't have the same codes I have, doesn't have the same lines he won't cross. If he decides that hurting you is the best way to get to me, he won't hesitate. So what do we do? I can't live in constant fear, Roman. That's not sustainable." Frustration leaked through the words because the idea of always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for something terrible to happen, was exhausting just to consider. "You won't have to live like this for long." Something in his voice changed, becoming colder, harder. "I'm taking care of the problem. Petrov is going to learn that touching what's mine has consequences he's not prepared to face." The way he said it, with that absolute certainty and implicit promise of violence, should have scared me, but instead, it just made that familiar warmth spread through my chest, the feeling of being protected so fiercely being something I was still learning to accept and appreciate. The attack happened 3 days later, on an ordinary Tuesday that started like any other, with nothing indicating it would be the day the abstract threat became violent and terrifying reality. I was at the library during the afternoon shift, helping an elderly lady find books about gardening, when I noticed strange movement near the main entrance. 2 men, who definitely didn't look like the type of people who normally frequented public libraries, had entered and were moving in my direction with clear purpose that made every survival instinct start screaming alarms. I didn't have time to fully process what was happening before I saw my bodyguards move, intercepting the men with brutal efficiency that transformed the quiet library area into an action scene in a matter of seconds. There were no screams or dramatic explosions like in movies, just quick and precise movements, muffled sounds of impact, and then the two men were on the ground being restrained, while other bodyguards I hadn't even noticed were present, appeared to help. I stood frozen in place, my brain struggling to process what I'd just witnessed, vaguely aware of the elderly lady beside me making shocked sounds, and other people in the library starting to realize something serious had happened. My phone rang before I could start moving again, and I answered with hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. "Thea," Roman's voice came loaded with barely contained panic I'd never heard from him before. "Are you okay? My men called me, said there was an attempt. Are you hurt?" I'm okay." The words came out shaky, shocked. "They didn't get near me. Your men protected me. I'm coming there. Now. Don't leave the library. Stay where my men can see you." The order came firm, and I heard sounds of rapid movement on his end of the line. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He arrived in 17 minutes, a record considering the distance from where he was, and the way he entered the library was like watching a force of nature in human form. His eyes scanned the environment immediately, locating my position in seconds, and then he was beside me, his hands running over my face, my arms, visually checking for injuries even though I'd told him on the phone I was fine. "Are you sure you're okay? They didn't touch you." The questions came urgent, desperate in a way that showed exactly how much the situation had shaken him. "I'm sure, I'm fine, just scared." I threw myself into his arms, seeking the comfort of his solid and safe presence, and he immediately wrapped me in an embrace so tight it almost made it hard to breathe. "Petrov is going to pay for this." The promise came whispered against my hair, loaded with an icy fury that sent shivers down my spine. "He's going to pay dearly for trying to hurt you." The war that followed happened completely outside my view, with Roman carefully keeping me away from any specific details about what exactly he was doing to eliminate Petrov's threat. All I knew came from vague comments from Victor, and the way the tension gradually drained from Roman's shoulders over the following days. A week after the attack at the library, he showed up at my apartment late at night with an expression that was a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "It's over," he said simply, entering and pulling me into an embrace that seemed as much about him seeking comfort as offering me security. "Petrov won't be a problem anymore. For anyone." I didn't ask for details because part of me didn't want to know exactly what that meant, what measures had been taken to ensure the threat had been permanently eliminated. Instead, I just held him, offering the silent comfort I'd learned he needed but rarely asked for. "You're safe now," he continued, his voice coming out tired but firm. "Completely safe. I made sure of it. Thank you for protecting me," I whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath my palm. "I'll always protect you, no matter what it costs, no matter what needs to be done." The promise came absolute, unwavering. "You're the most important thing in my life, Thea. More important than business, more important than power, more important than anything else." I pulled him to the couch, nestling together in comfortable silence as we processed everything that had happened over the past week. "Do you still want to stay with me?" The question came softly after a few minutes, loaded with vulnerability he rarely showed. "After all this, after seeing how dangerous it is to be with me, more than ever," I answered without hesitation, turning to look at him directly. "You saved me, Roman, protected me when I was in real danger. How could I want anything but to stay?" Something shifted in his expression, all the residual tension finally draining completely as he pulled me into a kiss that was different from all the others, loaded not just with love, but with deep gratitude and overwhelming relief. "I love you," he said against my lips, "more than words can express." "I love you too," I responded, and then added with conviction that came from the depths of my soul, "and I'm ready to prove it in every way, today, now, if you still want to." His eyes widened. "Are you sure? After everything that happened this week?" "Absolute. You protected me, kept me safe, risked everything for me. I trust you completely, Roman, and I want to be yours in every way." And by the way he looked at me in that moment, with reverence and love and desire so intense they were almost tangible, I knew it was finally the right time.
I choose you.
Chapter 10, First Time and Future. The walk to Roman's bedroom was made in silence, loaded with anticipation and nervousness that made my heart beat so hard I was sure he could hear it. Each step seemed both too fast and too slow, my mind oscillating between absolute certainty and small flashes of insecurity that still whispered doubts, even knowing this was the right decision. When we entered the bedroom, and Roman gently closed the door behind us, the reality of the moment finally solidified in a way that was both terrifying and absolutely perfect. He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his eyes was tempered with something so tender it made my chest tighten. "If you change your mind at any moment, at any second, you just need to say so, and we stop immediately." The words came firm, an absolute promise that left no room for doubt about how serious it was. "I'm not going to change my mind." I responded with conviction that came from the depths of my soul, taking a step toward him and touching his face with fingers that trembled only slightly. "I want you, Roman, completely." The kiss that followed started soft, but quickly deepened into something more urgent. Months of waiting and restraint finally finding release as we moved together toward the bed. His hands were gentle as they helped me lie down, each touch loaded with reverence that made it seem like I was something infinitely precious that needed to be handled with maximum care. "I'll go slow," he promised, positioned over me with his arms supporting his weight so as not to crush me, his ice-gray eyes fixed on mine with intensity that made it hard to breathe properly. "Tell me if it hurts too much, if you need me to stop or go slower." "Okay." The word came out nervous but confident, because despite the fear of the unknown, I trusted him completely and absolutely. What happened next was wrapped in gentleness and care that exceeded every expectation I had formed. Roman was patient in ways I didn't even know were possible, constantly checking with me, asking if everything was okay, adjusting based on every small sound I made or every tension he felt in my body. There was discomfort, yes, moments where I needed to take deep breaths and remind myself to relax, but the pain I'd worried so much about was minimized by his constant attention and by the emotional connection that transformed the physical act into something much deeper and more meaningful. Tears started to fall at some point, not from pain, but from emotion so intense I couldn't contain it. The reality of finally sharing this with someone I loved so completely, being overwhelming in all the best ways. Roman paused immediately when he saw the tears, worry clear in his expression. "Am I hurting you? We stop right now if you—" "No," I interrupted quickly, touching his face to reassure him. "It's not pain. It's just that I love you so much. This is all so perfect and I couldn't finish the sentence because more tears came, but Roman just kissed each one with that gentleness that always made my heart melt. "I love you more. You're perfect, Thea. Absolutely perfect. And you're mine now. Completely mine." The rest happened wrapped in soft whispers and reverent touches, and when it finally ended, we lay embraced in complete silence as we processed the weight of what had just happened between us. I started after a few minutes, trying to find adequate words to describe an experience that seemed to transcend common vocabulary. "Perfect?" Roman suggested, one hand tracing lazy patterns on my back in a way that was comforting and intimate at the same time. "Beyond perfect. Thank you for everything, for being so patient, so careful, for making this be exactly what I needed it to be." Gratitude leaked through every word. "Thank you, for trusting me enough to share this, for choosing me as the person you wanted to have this experience with." He kissed my forehead. "For giving me something so precious." "I'll always trust you," I promised, nestling closer to the warmth of his body. "And I'll always protect you, love you, worship you in every way possible." The promise came sealed with another kiss. We fell asleep like that, intertwined in ways that were both physical and emotional, more connected than we'd ever been before. I woke up the next morning, still wrapped in his arms, the sun filtering through the curtains and painting the room with soft golden light. Roman was already awake, watching me sleep with that intensity that should be disturbing, but instead just made something warm spread through my chest. "Are you watching me sleep?" I asked with a voice still hoarse from sleep, unable to avoid the small smile that curved my lips. "You're too beautiful not to watch." The answer came without shame or embarrassment, completely sincere. Heat instantly rose to my cheeks. "You're ridiculous. Ridiculously in love," he corrected, pulling me closer, "and completely without regrets about it." I laughed, the sound coming out soft and happy, in ways that seemed to perfectly sum up how I was feeling. "That was terrible, but it made you laugh, so it was completely worth it," he argued with logic that was hard to contest. We stayed there for a few more minutes just enjoying the quiet morning, until finally curiosity about the future made me ask, "What happens now?" "Now?" Roman repeated, as if the question was too obvious to need an answer. "Now you stay, forever, with me." "Forever is a very long time," I pointed out, but there was no real argument in the words. Just gentle observation. "And it's still not enough time with you," he responded with absolute conviction. "I could have centuries and it still wouldn't be enough." The declaration made something inside my chest tighten painfully from being so full of emotion. "Roman Volkov, you're the most impossible and perfect man I've ever met. And Thea Sinclair, you're the only pure and good thing I've ever had the privilege of touching. And I'm never letting you go. Good, because I'm not going anywhere." Months passed in a happiness that seemed surreal in its consistency, with Roman and I building a life together that mixed my quiet world of books and libraries with his world of dangerous business and enormous responsibilities. We found balance in ways I didn't think would be possible, creating a space where we could both exist authentically without compromising who we were. The library continued to be my sanctuary during the day, the place where I felt most completely myself, surrounded by stories and silence. And Roman continued to show up regularly with flowers in hand, and that small smile that was reserved only for me. "Here comes her obsessed boyfriend again," one of my colleagues commented with obvious amusement, When Roman walked in on a Tuesday afternoon, the bouquet of pink tulips standing out against his impeccable black suit, I smiled, getting up from my workstation and walking to him with my heart racing the same way it always raced when I saw him. "You came to see me again? I always come to see you." He responded as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, handing me the flowers and stealing a quick kiss that made some of the older librarians sigh romantically. "You're very possessive. You know that?" I commented, but there was no real reproach in the words. "And you love it." He countered with that confidence that came from knowing me too well. I couldn't deny it because he was completely right. "Yes, I do." "Good. Because you're mine, Thea. Forever, and I'll never get tired of reminding you of that. And you're mine. Equally," I responded, touching his face. "Forever, too." She was pure. He was darkness. She waited 28 years for the right person. He waited a lifetime for something worth protecting. When she confessed, crying, that she was chaste, expecting rejection, he said the word that changed everything: perfect. And it was. She healed the wounds he hid. He protected the innocence she guarded. No grand final declaration, just them, in the middle of a full library. He possessive and she confident. Love that started with tears and single words, and ended with absolute certainty. They were destiny. Now I've put together some really interesting trivia for you. So if you like fun facts and Easter eggs, you're going to love what I'm about to tell you. The story has 4 main villains: Caleb, the abusive ex; Bianca, the jealous ex-mistress; Nathan, the vengeful brother; and Victor, the big rival. So you could see how much our lovebirds suffered before they could be together. This next fun fact I doubt you noticed. Mira never knew Adrian's full last name until she became Mira Wolf. Leah was the only character who threatened to kill Adrian and lived to tell the tale. The first time Adrian says "I love you" is in public, not in private. Adrian never takes anyone's life directly in this story. But I can't reveal anything about the other ones. The baby's gender is revealed in Chapter 9, but the baby girl's name is never revealed in the story. Who knows? Maybe you'll find out in the future. Mira runs away in fear of the dangerous world, but becomes the queen of that world. The story has one complete flashback, and you realize how this was a love as intense as it was sudden. Mira's answer, Caleb who, at the end, mirrors how she completely overcame the trauma and is ready for a new life without adventures. But will she be able to achieve that? And to watch another unmissable story, click on the video that appears now on your screen and check it out.